Hi, David. How are you?
Hi, Laura. How you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. I was told that we needed to have this talk here because it's something that individuals are starting to ask about, and it's starting to come across more often, and that is pseudo spirit guides. Sometimes we say non-beneficial spirit guides, but pseudo
Ah,
spirit
yeah, yeah,
guides.
yeah, yeah.
And do you know what they are?
I do now, and to be honest, I didn't at first, and um, I mean, it was kind of funny that like I spoke to Ken, I believe on Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, and while we were talking about the things that I was looking for guidance on, uh, I started with talking about an experience that I had had, and that was the non-beneficial spirit, which is what it ended up being. I had
Okay,
reached out to you guys a few weeks ago about it, and like that's the kind of funny thing. Whenever I do get guidance from you guys, that I know that from a timing perspective, I'm not going to always get the answer when I want to get it, and
correct.
I need to always kind of wait. And when the answer is going to present itself, it will present itself in all due time. And so it was kind of funny how, like, because that was so pressing on my mind, but it was so related to um, everything else that I had questions about. So that was the kind of interesting thing that, um,
That's
and
when you learned about it.
exactly. And it turns out that you guys needed content material, and apparently my life is supposed to give you guys content. So
Yes, well,
uh,
you have some interesting experiences, that's for sure, and you're willing to share them, which is excellent.
oh
But
yeah,
for everyone who will be watching this, a pseudo spirit guide is basically a soul who has crossed over, and they're in a position where they believe they can help you, but they haven't been trained for their position. So it's like someone who goes to work at a fast food place, and the manager is training them on their first day, and all of a sudden they say, oh no, I've got this, I know how to do this, and they start trying to cook burgers and they keep burning everything, you know. So that's kind of what happens with a pseudo spirit guide. They're not ready, but they want to just jump in and try and help whomever they can.
right.
So with these non-beneficial pseudo spirit guides, whatever you want to call it, it's best to have them sent back so that they can go ahead and get training and do what they need to do. And not that they wreak havoc in your life, but they can cause some confusion and give you guidance that is not going to be the most beneficial for us.
Right. And one of the things that, so I do a little bit of mentoring myself on the side, for like my god kids and things like that. And that actually struck a memory for me where I always tell people, I go, listen, if you can't swim, you should not help folks who are drowning because you will both die. And
Right.
I think that's lifeguarding 101. Actually, they say that unless you're a proficient swimmer, most likely you'll cause both of you to die as a result of that. So, yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm gonna be honest, even though it's well intentioned, with these pseudo spirits and the non-beneficial spirits, they did prove to be very um, frustrating in the
Okay.
outcomes. So it wasn't a very. I was a little upset, and I'll admit that it took me a little bit to get over it.
Well, what
Um,
happened? What did
well,
they
so
do?
yeah, so to kind of start, well, actually, I'll kind of start at the end and go Tarantino style. So I believe like a week and a half, a little over a week ago, I had reached out to you saying that I had woken up one morning, and as I'm headed to the restroom to get ready for work, well, first thing I did is I heard a voice, and it was this female voice that said goodbye, and then I felt something leave, and in a somewhat inexplicable kind of way, where it felt like I could physically feel them leaving, but then obviously it was more a little bit on the spiritual, transient side. So I felt it, and I felt this presence leave, and I had no idea what it was. And the thing that really struck me was that this presence didn't feel evil. Like it didn't feel like it wanted to hurt me or do me harm. And I think that was one thing that really struck me as odd. But I didn't really feel like it was good necessarily either. So, just that experience was just such an unusual thing in the morning. So that's when I reached out to you and said, hey, listen, I heard this, could you have Ken check on it? And that's kind of what brought us up to this. And so when I was getting guidance or when I was actually rather talking to Ken on Sunday and talking about my experiences in the past few weeks, that was the first thing I wanted to know about was this non-beneficial spirit and what it was. And it turns out exactly like what you're saying is they think they know how to help, but not in the appropriate sort of way. And so um, I had been there was two things in my life that I was very much wanting. And um, I guess because I was kind of waiting for these things to manifest. And, I'm following guidance and following, kind of going with the flow and not forcing anything.
Uh-huh.
And without going into too much personal detail, that there were these two major events that I wanted to happen and two things that I wanted to happen for me. And it appeared like they were about to happen. And from talking with Ken after the fact, he was very surprised at the timing of it all. And he had told me, he goes, David, you gotta pace. You'll need to, these things are if you continue down this road that you're on, um, and kind of follow the teachings and follow the guidance, these sort of things could very potentially manifest. And I'm trying to be cautious with my words here because we're co-creators in the things that we think about and the way that we manifest our feelings, that um, it was good to kind of check myself on a regular basis to make sure that I wasn't um, out of frustration or a desire to run away or one of those kind of negative feelings that what was happening wasn't a byproduct of my impatience or my own my frustrations or things like that. So
Okay.
I had to be certain about that first. And so as that was kind of going along, and so for about 6 weeks or so, I was kind of going through a process. um I'll just tell you guys. So one of them had to do with wanting because it sounds weird. I'm speaking so abstractly, and so it's like I wanted something to happen, but then it didn't, and it's kind of like, all right, that makes no sense. um I've been looking for another job, and I've gotten looking for new opportunities, and I wanted to kind of push myself professionally and wanting something new. And from kind of speaking with Ken about it, he said, well, um, these these opportunities will present itself, so you don't have to force it. They'll kind of manifest in the down the road that you're walking as you're helping folks and as you're doing what you're supposed to. uh, you'll find these new opportunities that come your way that will be very good and be very very fruitful. And so um, when it happened uh, and the time frame that we talked about was a few years, and that was what from the conversations that Ken and I had, it was supposed to be in a few years. Now to me, um, within a few years means it could happen tomorrow, it can happen next week, it can happen next month, it can happen next year. And so I think that's the one thing with timing, that sometimes the guidance that I get for timing is either uh, very immediate, even though there's a very wide time frame given,
Right.
or sometimes I find myself waiting for uh, months and months, even years. And so I'm never quite sure what to make of it. And that's why, I try to stay in close contact with you guys to make sure that, hey, am I doing what I'm supposed to? Am I still on the right track? I feel that I am. So, part of it is that personal journey of making sure that I'm kind of staying in alignment, staying in my lane,
Right. Now,
right? So,
how does a pseudo spirit guide fit in with this whole job then?
well, and so that's kind of what we concluded, was that the pseudo spirit was guiding me towards um, really wanting this job, this particular gig. And so I've gone through the process, and I actually got to the final interview, and I thought I did really well. And so um, because I ended up at the final stage, you know, I felt really good about it, and it felt like even the job in itself, the job description, it literally looked like it was created for me particularly. And so, from a professional standpoint, I've kind of had a very unorthodox career path. So, having had this type of experience that I've gained in, you know, working in healthcare, it's been a very unusual, almost slumdog millionaire type of life. And so when I saw this position open up, it really felt like it was being created for me. And so all of the feelings that I had about it was very strong, and I felt really, I really wanted it, and that's really how it came down to, and it really felt like it was going to happen for me. And so, um, you know, I went through the process, and it ended up being that I ended up not getting the job,
Hmm.
and the and I heard from a third party that the reason was due to a miscommunication that I had with the interviewer. And so it seemed small and it seemed a little petty. And so, you know, it upset me greatly because I felt like I did everything I was supposed to do.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, what I had wanted to co-create or whatever that it is, it didn't happen. And so I was just left very frustrated. And so in a unusual like twist of sorts, it really should have been where I was supposed to reject that offer anyway, because as I kind of thought about it, and um, funny enough, I was with my goddaughter and her husband, and as I'm telling him about my experience and how frustrated I was, you know, he's quiet for a moment and he goes, you know, it's actually a really great thing, Dave. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, um, you don't want to work for someone like that, where they're willing to throw you under for a miscommunication and to punish you for something that you actually did correctly. So, you know,
Oh.
yeah, so kind of thinking about it in retrospect, and um, you know, and it took me a little bit to be okay with it because, you know, I knew in my head this is better for me, that it's better that I don't get that job, because even though the opportunity will look good, the money was better. Um, like if I'm gonna be miserable working for someone where I'm constantly on eggshells, hoping that I'm not blamed for something that I may or may not know about, I
Hmm.
didn't think was going to be a very good, you know, professional existence, right? And I don't think anybody should work like that, regardless of how well you might get paid. So,
So
you know,
that's all tied together, and that's how you and Ken kind of concluded that it was that pseudo spirit guide who was giving you those strong feelings and pushing you.
exactly, that's exactly what it is. And so it was the pseudo spirit was actually, even though in my head there were things that I kind of felt nervous about and I felt a little anxiety about,
Hmm.
but yet I felt the more overwhelming push to want this job and this opportunity. And so that felt very overwhelmingly strong. And so I started ignoring some of the potential red flags. So it was because there are things that I noticed, but I kind of chalked it up to, it's probably nothing. Oh, I don't think it's anything.
Oh, you
And
start rationalizing.
I really did, and yeah, and that I think that's what it was. Is when I started looking in retrospect on everything, it really, you know, it became so evident at the end of it that even after, you know, so um, I had talked. I think I'd spoken to you about a week before, or maybe less than a week, and wanting to find the time for us to talk, and I had just been having bad days, and I think I was just so frustrated by not getting what I wanted or what I thought I wanted, um, that, you know, I was just feeling bad and feeling kind of unmotivated, lazy, and a bit lethargic, and not wanting to do anything, and, you know, kind of wanting to be, because I felt bad, I wanted to be nasty at the same time. Like it was a, you know, that vicious cycle that, you know,
Right.
we
Yeah.
all go through, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So, but after talking with Ken and kind of confirming that experience, that it was more of that I wasn't the only one who was initiating it, that it was actually I was being influenced too. And as we were talking about it and kind of learning, and as I was learning about this, then it really started to make sense. And since then, that bad feeling, that regret, or that yearning, like that misplaced yearning, really isn't there anymore. And I'm able to like kind of go back to doing what I normally do, and I don't feel as bad or as negative about any of it. And I'm able to kind of just say, oh, well, that was a good learning experience, um, which it really was. I mean, I will say that these two major things, one being a job, and I will say one was a potential like relationship with a potential significant other. And I
Right.
really learned a lot from those experiences. And it was, I think, one of the things that because it's a non-beneficial, even though and it's kind of evident, I literally did everything right in the way that you're guided and you're supposed to. And I felt like I did everything right. And I was kind of reaffirmed. And Ken said that, he goes, well, you actually did everything right, but because it's not an appropriate guidance, the actual outcome was actually correct. That even though I did everything correctly, it wasn't supposed to happen. So
Right.
in a funny sort of way, that by me doing the right thing, even though my desire was to have that, whether it be the job or the girl, that I actually got what I was supposed to get, which was nothing. Which, that sounds terrible, but
Well, I know, thankfully, it only lasted a short time for you because when Ken and I were discussing this about pseudo spirit guides, he told me of a story that he had read about a woman who knew she was receiving guidance, and it happened at a time in her life where she really needed some guidance. And so, as the guidance started coming, though, everything just kept going wrong, and she just kept having failures, and her life was just miserable and stressful, but it lasted for 5 years. And finally, a friend of hers told her to go see a psychic, and the psychic said, well, how long has your brother been dead? And she said, my brother? And the psychic said, yes, your brother is here, he's with you, guiding you. Bum bum. Her brother had passed away shortly before all this had started, and so he wanted to help her. Of course, he hadn't gotten the training he needed in order to be a proper spirit guide. So he, of course, had to be sent back. And then all of a sudden, her life changed and
yeah.
everything started working out for her. But she was in that for 5 years. Could you imagine that? Whew. I'm sure some of us have been in that place before, but we just don't know it because we're not aware of it.
I can imagine that level of frustration. I was in the middle of something for like 12 years, but that's a whole different story. Which it actually had more to do with me balancing karma for having done something absolutely terrible, apparently, in a previous embodiment. But hey, that's a whole other type of story. And we'll talk about that another day. We'll talk about that another day. But yeah, I mean, I think that because throughout the process,
Mm-hmm.
I kept checking in with you guys, and I think that was critical to all of this, and like the timeliness of it all was very appropriate. It was because everything lasted about 6 weeks, like, and I think that for me it was compounded because there was these two major events that I really wanted to come to fruition,
Uh-huh.
and they seem to manifest literally at the same time, where within a few days of each other, you know, I meet this really great girl. I find this opportunity that looks almost perfect for me. That within a week of each other, it like both things started to kind of come about. And so, perhaps I should have been a little bit more suspicious, right? That
Well,
my two hearts' desires wanted both happened to happen at the same time.
but see, we don't want to slip into that, oh, it's too good to be true type mentality. It's good
No,
to
absolutely, absolutely.
definitely say, okay, is this true guidance? Is this, and just check on it. So
Yeah.
lessons learned.
No, absolutely. And I think that was what was so critical about this, that within this 6 week period that and it was kind of interesting is because I will say that as much as, so don't get me wrong, I love Ken and I love your husband to death, but his sense of memory is a bit wanting, and he sometimes will remember things differently than the way he and I discussed it. So,
Well, and that
and,
also comes to because a lot of times when he's speaking with us, he doesn't always say, oh, well, this is what I'm getting, or this is me talking. So when he's speaking with us, it can be kind of confusing because he'll go back and he'll be like, did we talk about that? I don't recall that. And it's, well, that's because it was a guidance that was coming through, and that's why he doesn't remember it. So I sometimes feel like I should record all conversations with him, but
and that's the funny thing is because he doesn't remember things that about some of the guidance that he gets, right? Or for the majority of it anyway.
right,
The ones that he gives me anyway.
he
But
just
for
relays
this,
it.
right. But funny enough, he remembered the timeline about when I would get a new work opportunity.
Now, did he remember it, or was he being shown and you just didn't know that he was being shown to tell you that?
Well, I don't know. And
That happens a lot.
and that's the funny thing is like perhaps that was the case because his thought was, well, the way David and I talked about it was that it wouldn't happen this quickly. So David remembers, so I'm pretty sure he's fine with it. And literally doesn't say a word to me about it and
Oh,
just kind of chalks it up to going, oh yeah, no, David remembers. And like I said, to me, within a few years means tomorrow, next week,
uh-huh.
next year, right? It could mean any of those things. And I get it that you're not supposed to put, our humanly time frames on things that, are being manifested throughout the spirit world because I know that time doesn't work exactly the same way.
Correct.
So when I hear a few years, that just means after now, right? And when that is it could be an hour from now, it could be 30 hours from now, right? So I have
You're
no
right.
idea, but and I think that's what threw me off is that because I know that I know that things that are being manifested in guidance that I'm getting is not within the time frames that make sense to us, that it's always within God's time, and us trusting in that and trusting God in that and trusting in the guidance and trusting in the masters, right? So with all of it, and yeah, I bought into it, and yes, I've seen it, and yes, I've seen it manifest in that way. And because I've seen both where things have happened within days, and then sometimes I've seen things happen within months, right? Where
Right.
I'm like, I think it's gonna be tomorrow, but no, it's literally, and some of it actually it was over a year. So, and I got literally the same verbiage. It'll happen within a few years, and I'm like, all right, cool. And then some have been within weeks, and some have been
Mhm.
within days. So I know it's literally all over the place, and that's why I don't. So and you're right, the whole it's too good to be true. I try not to fall into that, oh, maybe it's not as good as I think it is. No, it's usually better than I think it is, to be honest. So I am a believer of that, but I don't know. I think that, that was one of those funny things that were we being set up to have this conversation? And so that I'm supposed to learn from this, possibly. Um, in that sort of way, I know that God has a very funny sense of humor when it comes with me, and I feel like he and I like to have a lot of fun. It's just I wish he would let
Exactly.
me on it. I just wish he would let me in on the joke sometimes until after the fact. But I
Life is
guess it is
supposed to
what it
be
is.
fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. So,
I
well,
know it's supposed to be,
I thank you for sharing your
of
stories with
course.
us and for helping to discuss this whole idea of pseudo spirit guides so we can all get an understanding of it. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And I know we'll be talking again because you have a lot of stories to share.
And apparently, I have stories that haven't happened to me yet that I will be sharing again. So
Fantastic. I look
yeah,
forward to it.
wonderful.
See you again.
Okay, have a good one.